Hi, I'm Alec from EasierHabits.com. I help entrepreneurs harness the power of good habits to launch new businesses. And today, I want to share my story of how I left a cushy, well-paid coding job with benefits to work for myself and become an entrepreneur. And at the end of the video, I'll highlight some things you might want to think about if you're considering leaving a job to work for yourself or starting up a side gig that you eventually might leave your current job for. So I was an English major in college. I had some experience with computers. We got a computer in my family when I was young. I was even programming as part of games for a while. Took a couple programming courses in high school. And, I was the kind of kid like many boys my age that if left to my own devices, I could sit in that computer chair until my butt hurt and my bladder was bursting. I did well at programming in high school. So I had a technical bent. My older brother was a coder, but for some reason, my dad convinced me that applying to college as an English major looked better. I don't understand what world he was coming from, but I guess computers were relatively new. Anyway, I liked reading. The English major wasn't a big major, so I majored in English, and that also gave me plenty of time to study languages just for the fun of it and take a psych minor. So I enjoyed all of those things immensely. As graduation loomed, however, I didn't know what I wanted to do for a job. I knew I didn't want to be an English professor, and I went into the Career Counseling Center and asked them, do you have any job that's team-based, that's creative, but maybe with some technical aspects because I'm good with computers? And the advisor there just said, do you want to do HR? I have an HR internship right here. Pretty much zero thought, zero help. But I did run into an English professor who was teaching a web development course as a hobby, and I didn't even realize that was a career. I remembered my early days of GeoCity way back in the day when people were making those vanity sites with the horribly tiled images and neon text and horrible music that played on startup and weird GIFs, all of that stuff. Like, I remember making that. I really had enjoyed that. I didn't know you could make a career making better websites. And so I started to learn about that, had a couple classes under my belt, and was very confident that with some time after graduation, I could master the craft on my own since I had learned programming and, the web basics, and I was pretty good at studying for myself. And as I thought about that as a career, one of the things that I thought about was that it was high in demand, right? I was going to be able to make a good amount of money. It was pretty flexible as a career, i.e. there's lots of different versions of coding, lots of different niches within it, and lots of different types of jobs. You can work for big companies, small companies, you can freelance, etc. And there are aspects, especially of front-end web development, that go into product development and testing, as well as design, but you also have the coding and technical aspect of that. It was a really interesting mix of a number of skills, and that particularly appealed to me. So in demand, interesting skills, flexible career, those are all really good reasons to go work for somebody else. And so early on in my career, I was very much pointed already towards working for someone else. And then on top of that, my parents were an accountant and a lawyer. I didn't have any entrepreneurs in my network. I didn't have any experience starting or running a business. And I didn't have, as an English major, I didn't have any clear marketable skills. So, aside from, perhaps writing copy or something like that, pretty much all signs pointed to work for someone else, even before the 2008 financial crash. So I graduated in the spring of 2008, and then that fall, everything crashed. Everyone that I knew was pretty much either unemployed or doing unpaid internships. They didn't have benefits. And so I was living with my parents, temping to earn some extra money and going to coding interviews and failing them to help me learn coding. Eventually, I did land my first full-time job. And again, all that uncertainty, my lack of clear marketable skills and entrepreneurship experience meant I was headed 100% towards working for someone else. I don't think I really considered starting my own business, and I wouldn't have known where to start if I did. In the stress of the 2008 financial crash, I developed a stress reaction in my stomach where it would tighten up, and for days it would hurt almost like I had an ulcer. I would have to eat like rice and banana and very bland things for a few days to get it to calm down. But when I got my first job, full-time job as an entrepreneur, I could move out of my parents' house. I knew where my next paycheck was coming from, and I could even save up. I could afford a dirty old studio apartment in East Palo Alto, and I was just on cloud nine, and I was super happy. But soon enough, I realized that even though my whole goal at that time was just to get a full-time job, I was tunnel vision focused on that one thing. I pretty quickly realized that year that that was not a clear enough idea of what I needed in my career to make me happy. For one thing, I ended up not really caring about the product that I was working on. And that made it even worse when I had a lot of conflict issues with my boss. So there were some mistakes that I made as a first-time employee, but my boss was also really young, not much older than me. This is Silicon Valley, yay. Not much experience managing people very well, and kind of temperamental. And so he would give me like vague advice. He'd heard from one of his, business mentors that he'd picked up, like, work on the business, not in the business. And I'd be like, what does that mean? I'd actually ask him for details, or what about my work suggests that I'm not working on the business, I'm working in the business. I'd have those types of questions, and he didn't want to be questions. He just wanted to say a platitude and feel like a good boss. I think that was one of the things that started our initial conflict. I remember that he gave me a partial bonus, and so I asked him like what I needed to get the whole bonus. Part of that was a little bit of naivete on my end that, like, for the most part, my understanding in Silicon Valley is you're not actually supposed to get the full bonuses. I think there are some companies that do that, but you're not expected to, right? Full points, full marks is not necessarily bonus material. You have to do something to surprise them. Of course, they don't like give you an idea of what that is or negotiate that with you. Like, hey, if you achieve X goal, you'll get your bonus. Some companies do, but a lot of companies don't. And a lot of people who aren't experienced managers handle that in a very negative way. So I asked him, like, what was I doing that was not worthy of a full bonus? And that was exactly the wrong question. So that got him constantly nitpicking through my work and trying to figure out the things that were wrong. And so for the rest of my tenure there, he was always trying to figure out ways that I was not worthy. And that just led to more conflicts, and our talks got really awkward. On top of that, he was actually the CEO of the company. He really should have been doing a lot of other things rather than manage a junior individual contributor. I think that was another issue on his part. So I think he wasn't just happy doing that job and didn't enjoy that. And so the fact that as a junior, I wanted more training that I wasn't necessarily getting from the other web developers, and more feedback, etc., I think was just a demand on his time that he resented. So that really got me thinking two things. Like, one, I need to choose my companies more carefully so I have a product I really believe in and enjoy working for that can help me, paper over some of the inevitable discontents you will have with your job or frustrations you'll have on the job. But also, from my very first job, it felt like my career was in the hands of someone who actively disliked me, and who was looking for reasons to mark me down. So that, I think, was one of the seeds that would lead to entrepreneurship later on, that I wanted to be in control of my own career. So after this full-time job got a lot more stressful, my stress reaction in my stomach, my tummy, I almost said, I'm a dad. My stress reaction got a lot stronger. My stomach was hurting again. The one shining light at this time, actually, I was dating a girl long distance who was in a grad program. And she said, why don't you just take a break from that and come study in a grad program? A lot of people my age had done that recently after the 2008 crashed sometime in there. They'd gone back to school. So, and I liked school. So if I could figure it out financially, which I had saved up enough money in this year that if I went to an inexpensive school and got some scholarships, I could make it work. So I challenged her to find a program that would fit me, and she found instructional psychology and technology, which was magic. I had studied psychology undergrad, and this married it with education, not necessarily just school education, but it could be performance on the job. And one of the things that I loved most about web development was making tools that would help people be more efficient, more productive, better at what they do, or open up new opportunities for learning and growth for people. So like this really kind of brought everything together. After that program, I relaxed a little bit. I chilled out. I loved the conversations that I had with other interesting, bright, ambitious people who were in education. I didn't go into that field because it paid so much less than web development. But what I did after I graduated was focus in my career more on companies that did education. I worked for LinkedIn for a while, and I actually piloted one of those, their program that recommended online courses for you to take based on your LinkedIn profile. There's a much more professional version of that now. I'm happy to see that that became a product, so that was exciting. However, long before that became a product, I had actually moved on to companies more specifically education related. And that was a fantastic time of growth for me. I learned a lot about the craft of web development, but I also learned that I was a very multifaceted person, right? I had an English degree with a psych minor. I had an instructional psychology and technology master's. And I taught myself programming. And one of the things that I noticed was I did kind of stand out as an engineer, right? And I had one boss of my small company tell me I was a weird engineer in a good way because I had these weird skill sets. I was a little bit more outgoing. My communication background meant that I communicated more differently than your typical engineer, a little bit less blunt, a little bit more interested in how people were receiving my words. So I was a different type of engineer, and this would really start a schism that led me to work for myself. Some engineering history for you. Back in the day, you were an engineer, and some of them, if they wanted to make more money, had to be promoted to be managers, even if they were really code people and not people, right? They didn't like the managing people and helping those people become their best aspect. So when I was going from kind of mid to more senior level, companies were starting to realize we should have two different tracks. We should have an architect track for someone who is primarily a coder, and they will set the coding practices for the company, but they're not going to be managing people. So it doesn't require quite the same set of people skills. At the same time, for people who do want to focus a little bit more on the side of product and project management. I mean, usually you work with the product managers, but often the engineering manager would be heavily supporting them on technical aspects of the project. And this other engineering manager would also be, in theory, mentoring their direct reports. And so if you were more interested in these soft skills related to coding, then manager was a great place to be. And I looked at my background, my English degree, my psych minor, my instructional psychology and technology degree, and I realized I would be a perfect shoe-in for manager, right? I had the communication skills. I had training with my master's specifically in how to evaluate other people and in developing training programs. So I would be a great mentor. And to be honest, I think by many objective standards, I was a great manager when I had a chance to manage in my later career. So I remember one manager complaining that, there were two teams that split, and he offered for the people that had been his direct reports but went into this other team over here, they could still do one-on-one meetings with him while they got transitioned to the team. And he wasn't complaining, but he was saying he was kind of shocked that, none of them took him up on those meetings, that, within like a week, maybe they had one last meeting and, said goodbye and moved on. Whereas in contrast, when I actually had a direct report, I had team split, and those direct reports would, for the foreseeable future, still come back and do one-on-ones with me. I had, direct reports that left the company that wanted to keep in contact. So I think just from looking at the impact I had on my direct reports, I think whatever I was doing was working for them, right? And I had people express to me that the support I gave them, the encouragement, the way I was able to help them through challenges was very valuable. I was thrilled with the impact I was having. But as I got further in my career, I got to be discouraged about a few different things. And one of them is that engineering managers aren't actually hired to have a positive impact on their direct reports. It's kind of orthogonal. Because going back to the engineering history that I talked about earlier, right? All the people that were in senior positions in engineering were people who were engineers, and many of them were not actually comfortable with people. They just become managers because that was the next step in their career. This is not all of them, but is a preponderance. And so when I was up for a management position, my boss would say things like, can you even be a manager if you don't have back-end server-side database programming skills? I had some basic ones because I was a team player and I tried to help out, but that wasn't my focus and it's not what they hired me to do. But for some reason, more important than any of my communication skills or my training skills, I could even be volunteering in helping form the hiring process and the training process of the company. None of that seemed to count towards like, oh, you would be a shoo-in for manager. So I would find people who were very technical and wanted to be managers, making managers very quickly in 6 months, where it would take me a couple years potentially, even though I was already involved in hiring and training, which for me were shoo-ins. And that's when I realized what I thought was being a manager was not actually the job. So a couple things came into play here. One, my career was in the hands of people who fundamentally didn't understand or appreciate or value my skill set. They would say thank you, but it wasn't actually understood or appreciated to the level of, oh, that is a useful skill to have. We should hire you so you can spend more time doing the things that you're really good at. One, my career was in the hands of people who didn't really appreciate my skill set. Two, I wanted to have a big impact, but the impact I was having wasn't really the job. It felt like volunteering because I wasn't paid for the impact that I had on direct reports. And in fact, this became more obvious as I started to look at, managers and senior managers, and I could see some of them really didn't have agile project management skills, which I would have thought was like a requirement for the job, because a lot of what engineering managers do is help product managers with the technical side of like estimating how much engineering capacity we have each week to build stuff and how to break down projects into technical tickets that engineers can work on productively, et cetera. So there's a big component to that. So I was kind of surprised that like you could have a senior manager who was unfamiliar with how very basic things like agile functioned. At the same time, again, you could have senior managers or higher level managers that would say things like, I'm not that comfortable talking to people, so just tell me what you need and I'll try and get it to you, right? We're comfortable with the coaching side of things. So I realized if these people were satisfactory for the organization, and I actually in some cases like talked to their boss and just got their sense of like, oh, how is this person doing? And their boss thought they're doing great. So if that's true, they weren't actually being paid for the things I wanted to do. And what this made clear is not only was my unique skill set not really being recognized, but really the job that I thought I wanted in a company didn't exist. There isn't a job at most companies for mentoring other people because most companies are terrible at mentorship. They don't know what it looks like and they don't promote for it. So with all of these factors and one more factor, I started to become very disenchanted with my job and thinking about potentially working for myself. And the last thing that was part of the straw that broke the camel's back was that a lot of times I would see companies invest a lot of money and effort into failure. And I could see that failure coming from a mile away, and I would give them a heads up, and the company would say, maybe that's not true in this case. And they'd ignore it. The project would fail, and they're like, yeah, Alec, we probably should have done what you said. But then they didn't do anything differently from in the next project, right? Nothing was learned. And so the fact that we weren't really accountable for being successful or at least learning from failure, that drove me nuts. So the time came when I was going to give notice that I was going to leave my job. So 10 years into my career, I'm starting to get pretty discouraged. I actually have a 3-year plan with my wife about, like, if my career is not where I want it to be in 3 years, I'm going to consider working for myself, moving out of the world of secure paychecks and high benefits and super, super expensive houses in California. So, and you know, start afresh. And also that would be something that would allow my wife to work more too if I embarked on a more flexible career. So we had that backup plan. And then as I saw that, you know, teams not learning from their mistakes, and that's like nails on a chalkboard for me, because what I am all about is learning and growth. So like repeating the same broken process over and over again, it's just agony. And, you know, on top of that, the idea that I was just holding my breath, waiting for someone to let me focus on what I wanted to focus on the most, which was mentorship, especially mentorship in a technical web development area. Yeah, that was insane. And then when I finally realized, even if I got there, it wasn't the job I thought it was. Really what I would be paid for wouldn't be focusing on mentorship. Management is focused on a lot of other things. And so that was very discouraging. And finally, there was pretty much like the straw that broke the camel's back. I had direct reports, even though I was not officially a manager yet. I had been evaluated through a 6-month evaluation process, which like took the company a long time to start. And even when I did start it, I got really good feedback from my manager, from my direct reports, and still at the end of that 6 months, instead of, you know, becoming a manager, I was shunted off to another team as an individual contributor. They said they'd hire other people into that team, and then I would start to manage maybe, and I'd get an official promotion. And we didn't start high on the priority list of places to hire. That's fine. All right, I'm going to be patient. You know, wait as they hire one position, hire another position. Eventually, we're at the top of the list. They say, sorry, we're deprioritizing that hire. And then that happened 2 more times. So I'm like, what's even the point of this list here? Like, there is no list. And I had a frank conversation with my boss at that point that, like, look, you're not hiring anybody anytime soon. Or maybe that was even my boss's boss. And he was like, yeah, we're not. It's COVID. COVID had hit during this process while they were waiting to find, you know, grow that team so that I could be a manager. And yeah, that like COVID killed all hopes of finding someone. And at this point, I was already on my way out. COVID happened about 2 years into a 3-year plan where my wife and I were going to, you know, cut and run and work for ourselves if my career in Silicon Valley didn't pan out. But when I realized like nothing was going to change in the next year, I just realized it was time to move up our time frame. So I think even in like March of, was it 2020 already? Anyway, March of 2020, we had started looking for houses. So I was already, you know, trying to lock down houses. I was mentally out of there. But like the 3rd time they deprioritized someone for this team, I just told my boss, and I still remember exactly how this leaving the job conversation went down. I was in my cold garage with fingerless gloves, probably sitting on a heating pad. It was not well insulated. We're across the street from a train station because, you know, if in California, if you want to afford a cheap apartment for only $3,000, you need to get one right across from the train tracks where the train's going back and forth. So that's happening while I'm talking to my boss, and he's talking about how this position has been deprioritized yet again. And I just let him know. I don't say it meanly, I don't shout, but I let him know, like, look, you're gonna need to prioritize this because you're losing me. And he was surprised by that. And even though I had talks over the years with several people about becoming a manager, and even though I completed the manager training with flying colors, you know, that was actually the response I got at several levels of the hierarchy. Like, oh, I didn't know you wanted to be a manager. And yeah, that just kind of flattened me. I'm not sure why that happened or what was there in terms of like that level of surprise that I got. But to be honest, what that felt like was just like I was a balloon floating. I was soaring off into new heights. I had the excitement in the pit of my stomach you sometimes get from, at least I get being kind of nervous around heights, looking over the edge of something tall. I felt a little bit dangerously unmoored from the career that I had been building for 10 years working for other people, and more than a little bit worried and anxious that, I might pop in my career working for myself. But mostly it was the excitement and the relief, because all of those things that had been grating on my nerves, I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. So along the way, I've kind of called out factors that predispose me towards working for somebody else or working for myself. Let me list them here. One is entrepreneurial experience and network. So at the beginning of my career, of course, I had zero. I had a little bit more towards the end of my career. This is something I developed more myself, but it is a steep learning curve to learn how to run a business yourself if you don't have that experience, because it's not just about what you know, it's a skill. So if you don't have that, you might consider either working closely with someone who's starting a company, which I did have the opportunity to do occasionally, before I left and decided to start my own job, or actually working, shadowing an entrepreneur, right? So if you can't work for an entrepreneur, maybe shadow them, interview them, build your network, so you have resources you can go to learn business development skills. So another factor is, do you have a marketable skill you want to sell? If you don't know what skill you want to sell right now, maybe spend some time developing that. Make a career choice based on a skill that you have and want to develop to sell on your own, or work on something, start a side gig or hobby business with that skill so that you have a marketable skill, something to build a business around. Now, a third factor is finances, right? And especially at the beginning of my career, I was very attracted to higher salaries, benefits, etc. That is a good reason to work for somebody else. There are limitations of that. For instance, every profession will have some kind of career cap. Engineering has a pretty high one, so it will take a long time for most engineers to actually be able to replace an engineering salary working for themselves, unless they really have a great business ready to go, right when they quit. So that is, finances is often a reason to work for somebody else. But again, if you're really ambitious, that limit, right? You're probably never going to be better paid than the highest paid professional in your field, unless you are 1 in a billion, right? So finances are one of those factors. I will go much more in depth in a future video, specifically on how I de-risked and lowered the cost of working for myself, because I think that is such a big factor for most people. I have a video entirely on that. But other factors that predispose me a little bit more to working for myself, one of them is the shape of my skill set. I was more well-rounded, right? I had people, even if this would have made me good as a manager, as I felt it would, and I think some of my direct reports felt that it would be, most people get promoted for being known to be really good at one singular skill set. Hence, my boss telling me, like, can you even become a manager if you're not a back-end coder as well as a front-end coder? Even though I was hired to be a front-end specialist, right? So people who have very focused skill sets do well in companies. They get promoted. And plus, if you have a focused skill set, working for a company is a way to do only the thing that you want. If you're working for yourself, you have to do marketing, you have to structure your businesses, you have to do finances, you have to do all sorts of other processes. So that's great if you like being a multi-dimensional person who gets to work on a lot of different types of tasks. I guarantee there's going to be several of those tasks you don't like to do as an entrepreneur. But at least if you are the kind of person that learns quickly on your own and has a wide skill set to start with, you're better off and more prepared to work for yourself. Another factor in considering whether to work for yourself is, does the job you want even exist at your company? So a lot of companies have very specific, relatively traditional job titles. Now there's some fungibility. There's being a front-end developer as opposed to just a coder is a newer career than general coding, right? So that's, that's been kind of amorphous, and there's been a lot of confusion that people have had around that career. But for the most part, like, people start in companies, they have job descriptions and clear buckets they want to put people in. And so take a look. One, take a look at what people actually do, not just the job description or what people say they want in a role, because that was kind of my experience. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I think are essential to management people say they want. When you look at what they actually get paid for, right, that's not necessarily the same thing. And so making sure that the actual job you want exists as a bucket in that world, right? If you want something more custom, there's a good chance that you're not really going to nail that in your company. Now, you might branch out with a hobby or volunteering or other things that help you exercise other aspects of your personality and still work at a company, and that works for you. But if that's not enough, then maybe you want to work for yourself where you can design what is the right balance of activities for you. It takes a while. It takes a long time to figure out. It's a process. But it is rewarding to be able to work on the things that you want to work on. Another thing is impact. If you're working at a big company, chances are you're not going to have a huge individual impact on the customer. You might have a huge impact on, teammates or people around you. But if you work for yourself, that kind of switches. And so one of the things that is very gratifying working for myself is now, like, all of those mentorship things I wanted to be focused on in business, that is my business. That's how I keep clients. And that's how I know if I'm successful. And so having that aligned is a breath of fresh air. Like, that makes me feel like I can relax. Like, I am doing the right thing, because doing the thing I want to do actually leads to success, rather than is, just a strange quirk I volunteer doing at a company that wants me to do something else, right? So that kind of impact is one reason to change. But again, there's a certain isolating effect there too, where, like, if what you want to do is, mentor people on the corporate ladder, that kind of impact, or decide corporate policy. If you're ambitious and want to work your way up the corporate ladder, right? It's going to take a lot longer to get there, building your own company, than going into another company and, finding your way. And having that internal impact on a large company, much more likely to happen working for somebody else. So the last factor for me that I was considering was, is my career in the hands of somebody else? If you are working for a company, that means that someone else is deciding when, how, and what you work on a lot of the time. And whether or not you succeed, right? Whether you succeed in mentoring people or your project fails, actually, what determines your success ultimately is people's opinion of you. And so if you want your career to actually be determined by your own skills, then you want to work for yourself. Now, that's a kick in the pants at first, and we'll talk about that more in the psychological cost of being an entrepreneur, because chances are you're not nearly as successful as you think you are. You have been sheltered from the impact of your failure, but you can finally feel that and learn and grow working for yourself in a way that you won't feel that at another company. If this video has been helpful for you, please like so that other entrepreneurs can find it, and subscribe so that you can get more of my content. If you would like help navigating the multiple steep learning curves of becoming an entrepreneur, go ahead to easierhabits.com and sign up for a free consultation. I can help you establish your goals and next steps. And if you're interested, no pressure, we can continue in weekly paid coaching sessions. My clients find that they are less stressed and anxious, more confident, more excited about their work, able to start health and productivity habits that keep them at their best, habits that they haven't been able to keep for years, and that ultimately they start and launch projects that they have been putting off for months and years, and gain a velocity and momentum in their business that they did not have on their own. Until next week, make big changes, one small habit at a time.